The night was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that made even the softest sound seem louder. The wind moved gently through the tall oak trees that lined the streets of the small southern college town. It was late, close to midnight, but the campus still glowed with yellow light from the library windows and street lamps. Malik Turner walked alone on the sidewalk, the strap of his backpack slung over his right shoulder, a half-empty water bottle tucked into the side pocket. He had spent the last 5 hours studying for his midterms. It had been a long day, but his mind was clear. He liked walking at night. It gave him space to think. Malik was a second-year political science student. He was 20 years old, tall, lean, with a soft smile that appeared only when he felt safe. He loved learning about how the world worked, how laws were made, and how people's lives were shaped by decisions far away from them. He often imagined becoming a lawyer someday. Not the kind that chases headlines, but the kind that listens, helps, and defends those who have no voice. But Malik's path had never been simple. He grew up in foster care, moving from home to home. He didn't know his parents. He had a few memories of being very young, maybe 4 or 5 years old, but they were like old photographs, faded and out of focus. What he did know was that his mother had left when he was small, and his father had never been in the picture. That kind of absence leaves a mark, even when you learn to live with it. Despite that, Malik had built something for himself. He had friends who cared about him, professors who saw potential in him, and a scholarship that paid for most of his tuition. He worked weekends at a small coffee shop downtown. He didn't have much, but what he had was built with quiet strength and endless hours of effort. The walk from the library to his dorm usually took about 10 minutes. He knew the route well. First past the student center, then across a small park, then down a street with a row of small shops, most of them closed at this hour. The air carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and the faint sweetness of honeysuckle growing on the fences. Malik liked these small details. They made the world feel gentle even when it wasn't always kind. He wore a navy hoodie with his college's name across the chest, faded jeans and worn-out sneakers. His backpack was heavy with books and a laptop, but he didn't mind. He liked the feeling of carrying something that represented his dreams. A few cars passed by on the road. Their headlights drew long, white lines on the wet pavement. The rain earlier that evening had left the ground damp and shiny, like a mirror reflecting the streetlights. Malik pulled his hoodie up, not because he was cold, but because he liked how it made him feel wrapped in his own small world. He thought about the essay he needed to finish over the weekend. He thought about calling his best friend, Tara, who always had something funny to say when he felt tired. He thought about how far he had come since the boy who once felt invisible in crowded foster homes. But just as he reached the corner of Maple Street and Jefferson Avenue, a quiet spot with a closed convenience store and a single flickering lamppost, something shifted. A car engine hummed behind him. He didn't turn around immediately. It wasn't unusual for a car to pass by. But the sound grew slower, softer, almost as if it were following him. Malik's steps grew a little more careful, his shoulders straightening without him even realizing it. The car rolled up next to the sidewalk. It was a police cruiser. Malik glanced to the side. The blue and white markings were easy to recognize, even in the dim light. Inside, a uniformed officer sat behind the wheel. His hands rested on the steering wheel, his face mostly hidden by the shadows, but his eyes were sharp. Malik had seen that look before. Not from this man, but from others like him. He had learned how to read that look long before he learned how to solve equations. Malik kept walking, steady and calm. He didn't want to give any reason for trouble. That was something many young people like him learned early, not from books, but from experience. The officer's window rolled down with a low mechanical sound. A voice called out, not loud but firm. "Hey, you, stop for a second." Malik slowed down and turned to face the cruiser. He kept his hands visible at his sides. "Yes, officer," he said politely, though his heartbeat had started to tap faster in his chest. The officer stepped out of the car. He was tall and broad, with a firm expression. His name tag read R. Henderson. Malik didn't know him, but in a town this size, people often knew faces. Officer Henderson was known on campus too, not officially, but through quiet conversations. Some said he was tough. Some said he was strict. A few said he seemed to look at certain students a little differently. "What are you doing out here this late?" the officer asked. "Just heading back to my dorm," Malik answered carefully. "Where's your ID?" the officer said. Malik reached slowly into his backpack and pulled out his student ID. He handed it over. The officer took it and shined his flashlight on it, though the streetlight was already bright enough. Malik kept still. His hands were slightly cold. The moment stretched longer than it needed to. Malik felt it, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but heavy. He didn't know why the officer was stopping him. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He had walked this route hundreds of times before. But in moments like these, logic didn't always matter. The officer's radio crackled softly, but no words came through. The night around them stayed quiet. Malik tried to keep his breathing steady. Then the officer asked more questions: where he lived, where he was coming from, what he was carrying in his bag. Malik answered each question calmly, because that was the safest thing to do. He opened his bag and showed the officer his books, his laptop, and the leftover sandwich he hadn't eaten at the library. Nothing about this moment should have been a problem. But something in the officer's expression stayed hard, as if Malik's answers weren't enough. The flashlight moved across Malik's face, across his clothes, across his bag again. Behind them, a car drove by, slowing down slightly as the driver looked at the scene. Malik noticed a couple walking across the street on the opposite side. They whispered to each other but kept walking. That was something else Malik had learned. People often saw, but they didn't always step in. The officer held the ID for a moment longer, then finally gave it back. But he didn't step away. Malik understood what that meant. This wasn't just a routine check, it was something else. A kind of quiet test. Malik stood a little straighter. His voice stayed calm. "Is there a problem, officer?" The man looked at him, his jaw tight. "Just making sure everything's in order," he said slowly. Malik nodded. He didn't argue. That never made things better. For a moment, they just stood there, facing each other. The warm breeze moved gently between them, carrying the soft scent of rain and grass. Malik wanted to keep walking. He wanted to go back to the quiet safety of his dorm room, where the world felt small and manageable. But he also knew he couldn't just turn his back. What neither of them knew in that quiet corner of Maple Street was how much this night would change everything. Malik thought this was just another late walk home after studying. The officer thought it was just another night on patrol. But beneath the surface, a hidden truth was waiting, one that connected them in a way neither expected. It wasn't just about a walk home. It wasn't just about a question on the street. This was the beginning of a story that had been building quietly for years. A story Malik didn't even know he was part of. He tightened the straps of his backpack and took a slow breath, the kind of breath that comes before something important even if you don't yet know it. The officer adjusted his belt, glancing at Malik one more time. The wind rustled the trees softly, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Malik didn't know that this officer worked directly under the town's police chief, a man who carried a secret about Malik's past. He didn't know that the name written on old papers in a dusty drawer at City Hall was the same name of the man who had walked out of his life before he even had a chance to know him. The air felt a little heavier now, though nothing had been said. This was the kind of moment that seems small from the outside, but echoes for years after. Malik, standing under the flickering streetlight, thought only about making it home. But destiny had already written the next chapters of his story, and it all began with this quiet night. One cautious conversation and a hidden connection waiting to be revealed. The night seemed to stretch out longer than usual. The sound of distant crickets filled the air as Malik stood near the corner of Maple Street, facing the officer. The streetlight above flickered softly, making everything around them feel like it was moving in slow motion. Malik could feel the cool air on his skin, but inside, his heart was beating a little faster with every passing second. The officer's name tag still caught the light. R. Henderson. He stood with the kind of posture that came from years of habit. Feet apart, hands at his sides, eyes steady. Malik had seen many officers on campus before, but something about this moment felt different. It wasn't what was being said. It was what wasn't. Malik had already shown his ID, answered every question clearly, and explained where he was going. By all logic, that should have been the end of it. But the officer didn't seem ready to let him go. He took a slow step closer, shining the flashlight again even though Malik was standing in plain sight. "Late night to be out alone, huh?" the officer said with a tone that sounded more like a test than a question. "Yes, sir," Malik answered, steady and respectful. "I was studying at the library. Just heading to my dorm now." The officer tilted his head slightly as if trying to read between Malik's words. He looked at Malik's backpack again, even though he'd already seen inside. "Library, huh?" he repeated, like he wanted to be sure. "Yes," Malik replied calmly. For a brief second, they both stayed quiet. A car passed in the distance, its headlights sweeping across the road before disappearing down the hill. Malik could almost hear the sound of his own breathing now. The officer finally gave a short nod but didn't move back. "You go to the college here?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Malik said. "Second year. What are you studying?" "Political science." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Big dreams?" Malik gave a small, polite smile. "Something like that." The officer didn't smile back. Instead, he looked at him the way someone might look at a puzzle they weren't sure they could solve. Malik had felt this before. It wasn't new. It was the quiet kind of doubt that follows some people around no matter how hard they work to prove themselves. Malik tried to keep his posture calm. Inside, though, there was a tiny storm building, one made of frustration, nerves, and the weight of memories from other moments like this one. But he didn't let it show. He had learned long ago how to hold his emotions carefully, like fragile glass. Another student walked by on the opposite sidewalk. A young woman with headphones on, scrolling through her phone. She looked up briefly, saw the scene, then lowered her gaze again. She kept walking without slowing down. Malik noticed her, then looked back at the officer. "Is everything okay?" Malik asked softly. The officer's expression didn't change. "Just making sure," he said. But his voice carried a kind of firmness that suggested he wasn't quite done. Malik nodded slowly, even though part of him wanted to just walk away. But he knew better. Sometimes what should be simple isn't simple at all. He stood still, hands visible, waiting. The officer stepped to the side, as if circling slightly, not in a threatening way, but in a way that made Malik feel like every small movement was being watched closely. Malik felt the cold edge of the street curb behind his shoes. The air around them was still. Then the officer spoke again. "You live in the dorms?" "Yes." "Which one?" "Jefferson Hall," Malik replied. "Mind if I ask you a few more questions?" The officer said, though his tone made it sound less like a question and more like an instruction. Malik nodded. "Okay." The officer crossed his arms and leaned slightly against the hood of his cruiser. The engine hummed softly. The night air carried the faint sound of someone's music in the distance, maybe from a car window or a dorm party somewhere down the street. Malik wished he was already there, away from this strange, quiet scene. "So what made you want to study political science?" the officer asked, surprising Malik a little. The question was casual, but the way he asked it didn't feel casual. "I want to work in public service," Malik said after a second. "Maybe be a lawyer. I like understanding how systems work." "Lawyer, huh?" the officer said slowly. "That's a big goal," Malik nodded. "Yes, sir," the officer gave a small shrug. "Big goals are fine, but the world doesn't always make it easy." Malik knew exactly what he meant, even though the words were simple. He'd heard similar things before, from people who meant well and from people who didn't. He had spent years learning how to keep moving forward, even when the world tried to tell him otherwise. "Yes, sir," Malik said again. "I know." The officer studied him for a few seconds, then let out a breath as if he was trying to decide something. Malik shifted slightly, adjusting the strap on his backpack. "Look," the officer finally said. "We've had some reports of people hanging around this area late at night." "I'm just checking." Malik nodded slowly. "I understand." The officer's eyes narrowed a little, as if trying to see whether Malik truly did understand. Malik kept his face calm. "I've walked this way many times before," he added quietly. "It's usually peaceful here." The officer didn't respond right away. Instead, He took out a small notepad from his pocket and jotted something down. Malik didn't know what. He wanted to ask but decided not to. It wouldn't help. The silence stretched again. A few more cars passed, their headlights casting brief glimmers across the officer's badge. The wind picked up, making the leaves on the trees whisper softly. Malik stood still, almost wishing the moment would fast forward like a scene in a movie. "All right," the officer finally said, tucking the notepad away. "You can head back to your dorm." Malik felt a small wave of relief wash through him. "Thank you, officer," he said. But before Malik could turn to walk away, the officer's radio came to life with a soft crackle. A voice spoke through, muffled but clear enough. Henderson tilted his head, listening closely. His expression shifted slightly, like he'd just remembered something important. "Hold on a second," he said, lifting a hand. Malik froze in place again, his moment of relief fading quickly. The officer turned slightly, speaking into the radio in a low voice. Malik couldn't make out every word, but he caught bits and pieces. Check. Name. Description. He knew then that the officer was double-checking his information. Part of him wanted to sigh, but he held it in. He had nothing to hide. He had done nothing wrong. Still, it didn't feel good being the one standing under the flickering streetlight, waiting for someone else's decision to set him free. Henderson's eyes flicked back toward him as he spoke into the radio. Malik met his gaze but didn't say anything. There was nothing more to say. He just wanted to go home. After a minute, the officer lowered the radio and nodded slightly to himself. Whatever information came through seemed to settle something, but Malik couldn't read whether it was good or bad. Henderson walked a few steps closer, not fast, just enough to make the space between them feel smaller again. "All right," the officer said slowly. "Everything checks out." Malik exhaled quietly. "Thank you," he said again. The officer gave a short nod, but something lingered in his expression. A kind of curiosity, or maybe recognition. He looked at Malik in a way that made Malik feel like the moment wasn't over yet, even if the words suggested it was. "Do you have family around here?" Henderson asked suddenly. Malik blinked, caught off guard. "No, sir. Not that I know of," he answered truthfully. The officer tilted his head. "Not that you know of?" "I grew up in foster care," Malik said, simple and clear. He didn't usually tell strangers that, but for some reason it came out without much thought. Something flickered in the officer's eyes. Not shock, not pity. Something else, something Malik couldn't quite name. Henderson's jaw tightened slightly, then relaxed again. "I see," the officer said quietly. "All right, then." Malik shifted his weight slightly, unsure why the conversation was still going on. The officer seemed lost in a thought for a second, like a memory had passed behind his eyes. "Well," Henderson finally said, "be careful walking alone at night. You never know who might be around." "Yes, sir," Malik said. The officer stepped back toward his cruiser, opening the door but not getting in just yet. Malik stayed where he was, making sure he wasn't moving too quickly. He didn't want any misunderstanding. The air between them felt different now. Not less tense, just different. Henderson looked at Malik once more, as if trying to place a familiar face in a crowded memory. "Good night," the officer finally said. "Good night," Malik replied. Malik turned and began walking down the street toward the dorms. He could still feel the weight of the officer's gaze on his back, even after he was a good distance away. His steps were calm, but his thoughts were racing quietly inside him. He thought about the officer's last question. "Do you have family around here?" No one had ever asked it like that before. Not with that look. Not with that strange hesitation afterward. The night was still quiet, but it no longer felt soft. It felt heavier, like something was slowly moving beneath the surface of his life, waiting to be uncovered. Malik didn't know what it was yet. But somewhere deep inside he felt it, the first gentle pull of a story far bigger than he had imagined. The night felt colder than before as Malik walked toward his dorm. It wasn't the weather, just the feeling in his chest. His steps echoed softly on the damp pavement. The air was still, except for the faint sound of distant music and the wind brushing through the trees. Everything looked the same as it always did, but Malik couldn't shake the sense that something had quietly shifted. He walked past the fountain near the student center, its water gently flowing even in the dark. The lights above it shimmered on the surface, making the water look like liquid glass. Normally, Malik liked this spot. It was peaceful and calm. But tonight he barely noticed its beauty. His mind was still stuck on that moment with Officer Henderson, on the way the man looked at him at the end. Not with anger, not even with suspicion anymore. It was something else, something hard to explain. Do you have family around here? That question kept echoing in his head. He'd been asked about his past before, teachers, friends, even kind strangers sometimes. But the way Henderson had asked was different. His voice had softened slightly, almost as if he knew something. Malik tried to brush the thought away. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe he was overthinking it, but a small part of him couldn't let it go. When Malik finally reached Jefferson Hall, he pushed open the front door with his student ID card. The warm air from inside touched his face. The lobby was quiet except for the soft buzzing of a vending machine and the glow of a TV that no one was watching. He crossed the hallway slowly, feeling the tiredness settle into his shoulders. As he walked toward the elevator, he heard a familiar voice call out, "Malik." He turned to see his friend Tara hurrying toward him. She wore an oversized hoodie and held a cup of instant noodles in one hand. Her hair was tied in a messy bun and her eyes carried the same spark of energy they always did. "Where have you been?" she asked. "I texted you like 4 times. "Library," Malik said with a small smile. "Lost track of time." Tara narrowed her eyes playfully. "Library at midnight? You're either very smart or very crazy. Maybe both," Malik said with a quiet laugh. But Tara noticed something else in his voice. She tilted her head. "You okay?" Malik hesitated. He didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but Tara had a way of seeing through the small things. "Yeah," he finally said, "just something happened on the way back." Tara frowned. "What happened?" "I got stopped by an officer." Her eyes widened slightly. "What? Why?" Malik shrugged lightly. "He said he was checking because it's late." "Did he give you a hard time?" she asked. "No," Malik said quickly. "I mean, not really. Just a lot of questions." Tara studied his face for a second, reading between the lines. "But it bothered you." Malik didn't answer right away. He leaned against the wall near the elevator, hands in the pocket of his hoodie. "He asked me about my family." Tara blinked. "That's kind of random." "Yeah," Malik said softly. "And the way he looked at me when I answered. It was weird." "What did you say?" "I told him I don't have any. At least not around here." Tara's face softened. She knew a lot about Malik's past. Not everything, but enough to understand why that question could feel heavier than it sounded. "Maybe he was just making small talk," she offered gently. "Maybe," Malik said, though he didn't really believe it. They went up to the 3rd floor together. The hallway smelled faintly like old carpet and laundry detergent, the same as always. Malik's room was at the far end. When they reached it, Tara stopped and looked at him again. "You sure you're okay?" she asked. "Yeah," Malik said with a small nod. "Just tired." "All right," she said, though she didn't seem fully convinced. "Get some sleep. And Malik, if something's bothering you, you can talk to me." He gave a grateful smile. "I know." Tara waved her cup of noodles dramatically as she walked back down the hall. "Good night, genius." Malik chuckled softly. "Good night." Once inside his room, Malik tossed his backpack onto the chair by the desk and sat on the edge of his bed. The small room was quiet. A single lamp lit the space with a warm golden glow. His laptop was still open from earlier in the day, and a pile of books sat neatly beside it. Normally, this was his safe space, a tiny world of his own. But tonight, even the silence felt heavier. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. His thoughts drifted to the question again. "Do you have family around here?" Why did it feel like the officer had asked it as if he already knew something? Malik had lived his whole life without answers about his family. When he was younger, he used to imagine stories, little pieces of who they might have been. Maybe his dad was a teacher. Maybe his mom loved music. Maybe they weren't ready for him. But as he got older, those stories faded into quiet acceptance. Some questions, he told himself, just didn't have answers. But now, one unexpected question from a stranger in uniform had shaken that quiet. He picked up his phone and stared at it. A thought crossed his mind. Could he have known something about me? It felt far-fetched, but the feeling wouldn't leave. Malik opened his notes app and wrote down the officer's name before it could slip from his memory. R. Henderson. He didn't know why he did it. It just felt important to remember. The next morning, Malik's alarm went off at 7:30. Sunlight pushed its way through the thin curtains, lighting up the room with soft gold. He rubbed his eyes and sat up slowly, still feeling the weight of the night before. The air felt fresh, but his mind was still restless. He got ready for class, pulling on a simple t-shirt and jacket. Outside, campus was coming alive. Students hurried across the courtyard with backpacks and coffee cups. Birds chirped in the oak trees. It should have felt like a normal day. But as Malik walked toward his first lecture, every detail seemed sharper. He caught himself glancing at every passing police cruiser, half expecting to see the same face. During class, Malik barely paid attention. The professor's voice faded into background noise. He kept replaying the scene in his head, the flashlight, the steady stare, the question about family. He wondered if he was making something big out of something small, but something deep inside him whispered that it wasn't nothing. After class, he found himself sitting on a bench near the student center. Tara joined him, holding a smoothie and chewing on the straw. "You're a million miles away," she said. "Just thinking," Malik replied. "About last night?" He nodded. "Malik," she said softly, "you've been through a lot in your life, but sometimes weird moments are just weird moments. Not everything is a big mystery." "I know," Malik said, "but it didn't feel random. It felt personal." Tara tilted her head. "Personal how?" "I don't know," Malik admitted. "The way he looked at me, like he recognized something." Tara was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember his name?" "Henderson," Malik said. "R. Henderson." Tara tapped her finger against the cup, thinking. "You know, my cousin works at the campus administration building. They keep records of local officers who do patrol shifts around the college. I could ask her about him." Malik hesitated. "I don't want to cause trouble." "It's just a name," Tara said. "No trouble in that." He gave her a small nod. "Okay," she smiled. "Leave it to me." As she walked away, Malik leaned back on the bench, looking at the sky. A few clouds drifted slowly. The wind carried the scent of flowers from the nearby garden. But inside, something was still unsettled. That afternoon, while Malik was in the library trying to study, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Tara. "His full name is Richard Henderson. Been on the force 12 years, local. Knows the police chief personally." Malik stared at the screen for a long moment. He didn't know what he had expected to find. But that last part made his chest tighten a little. Knows the police chief personally. It didn't mean anything specific, but it didn't feel like nothing either. As the day went on, little pieces of unease began fitting together like puzzle edges. Malik remembered how Henderson had looked at him when he said he didn't know his family. That flicker in his eyes wasn't random. It was like a spark of recognition. That night, Malik lay in bed with the lights off, staring into the dark. His mind wouldn't rest. He thought about the police chief. He didn't know much about the man except what everyone else in town did. He had been the face of the local department for years, respected by many, always appearing at community events, parades, and press conferences. But Malik also remembered something from his childhood records. When he turned 18, he'd been allowed to see a few sealed files from his foster care folder. One of the only things written under father's information was a single name. A last name, actually, Whitaker. He hadn't thought much about it since then. It was just a name on a page. But now, lying in the dark, another thought slipped quietly into his mind. The police chief's last name is Whitaker. The room seemed even quieter now. His heart thumped slowly, not out of fear, but out of something deeper. Curiosity, confusion, and a hint of something he couldn't name. Could it be a coincidence? Probably, but what if it wasn't? He turned over, pressing his cheek against the pillow. He told himself not to read too much into it. But the thought wouldn't leave. It stayed with him like a soft whisper at the back of his mind, growing louder with each passing hour. And in that quiet room, Malik didn't yet know that the question asked under a flickering streetlight was about to open a door to a truth he had lived beside his entire life, without ever seeing it. The next few days passed slowly, but Malik's mind didn't rest. Classes came and went, but his thoughts were somewhere else. Every time he saw a police cruiser on campus, his heart skipped a small beat. He kept replaying the moment in his head, the way Officer Henderson had looked at him, the question about family, the strange flicker of recognition in the officer's eyes. And now there was something new in the mix. The police chief's last name, Whitaker, the same last name written on his old foster care file. He hadn't thought about that file in years, but it now felt like a puzzle piece that might fit somewhere unexpected. On Thursday afternoon, Malik found himself standing outside the administrative building. It wasn't planned. He had walked here almost without thinking, like his feet had made the decision before his mind did. The building was tall with wide steps and glass doors. Students passed by, chatting, laughing, heading to their next classes. Everything looked normal around him. But to Malik, it felt like he was standing at the edge of something important. He took a slow breath and climbed the steps. Inside, the air was cool and quiet. A lady at the reception desk smiled politely. "How can I help you?" Malik hesitated. He had no clear plan, but after a moment he said, "Hi, I was wondering if I could look at my old foster care file. I think it's stored here or connected through the county office." The woman typed something on her computer, her nails clicking softly against the keyboard. "Are you a current student here?" "Yes," Malik said, "but I grew up in the system. I saw my file when I turned 18, but I never made a copy. I just want to look at it again." She nodded slowly. "You'll have to make a formal request. It might take a day or two, but I can help you fill out the form." Malik nodded, feeling a quiet determination building inside him. He filled out the form carefully, signed his name, and handed it back. As he walked out of the building, the sun hit his face. He didn't know what he would find, but something in his chest felt both heavy and hopeful. That evening, Tara found him sitting on the steps near the fountain, the same place he had passed the night he met the officer. She sat down beside him, holding a cup of iced tea. "You've been quiet all week," she said softly. Malik gave a small smile. "Yeah." She sipped her drink and waited. Tara was good at that. She didn't push, she just stayed. "I filed a request to see my old foster file again," Malik finally said. Tara turned to him, eyebrows raised. "Really?" "Yeah. Why?" Malik looked at the water in the fountain. It reflected the orange glow of the sunset. "Because of that night. Because of the way he looked at me. Because of one question." She was silent for a moment, then nodded. "You think there's something there?" "I don't know what I think," Malik admitted. "But I need to know, even if it's nothing." The next day, Malik received an email from the office saying his file would be available to review in person on Monday. The weekend felt long. He went through his usual routine, classes, work at the coffee shop, late nights in the library. But underneath it all, he carried a quiet impatience. Every clock seemed slower. Every hour stretched longer. On Monday morning, he walked to the administrative building again. The air was crisp and clear, and the sky was a soft blue. When he entered the records office, a woman led him to a small room with a wooden table and a thin folder sitting on it. The folder looked old, like it had been stored away for years. "You can look at it here," she said kindly. "Take your time." Malik sat down slowly and opened the folder. He saw familiar pages: birth information, foster care transfers, medical records, school reports. All of it was a quiet history of his life, told through official words and faded ink. He turned the pages carefully until he reached the section labeled Parental Information. His mother's name was listed, but the line for father had only one word: Whitaker. No first name, just that. He stared at it for a long moment, his heart beating softly in his chest. He leaned back in the chair and whispered to himself, "Whitaker." It wasn't proof of anything. But it wasn't nothing either. After leaving the building, Malik walked to the student center lawn and sat under an oak tree. He felt the soft breeze brush against his face. The name had always been a mystery to him, something he had carried quietly but never explored. Now it was right there again, standing in front of him like a door waiting to be opened. That afternoon, Tara found him again. She always seemed to appear when he needed someone. "You found something, didn't you?" she asked. Malik nodded slowly. "A name." "It's the same as the police chief's." Tara's eyes widened. "Malik." "I know," he said. "It doesn't prove anything. But it's not just a random name either. What are you going to do?" Malik looked out at the lawn. Students were playing frisbee, laughing, sitting on blankets. Life around him was so normal. But inside, he felt like the ground beneath him had shifted a little. "I need to talk to him," Malik said finally. Tara blinked. "The chief?" "Yes, are you sure?" "No," Malik admitted. But I can't just keep wondering. For the next few days, Malik thought carefully about how to approach it. He didn't want to make accusations. He didn't want drama. He just wanted the truth. So he wrote a short letter, nothing too personal, just a calm, respectful request asking if he could speak with the police chief privately about a personal matter. He left the letter at the station's front desk. 3 days later, Malik received an email from the chief's secretary. It said he could meet the chief on Friday afternoon at his office. When Friday came, Malik dressed neatly in a clean shirt and jeans. He wanted to look calm, steady. As he walked to the police department building, his heart beat a little faster. The building stood tall, with glass doors and a flag fluttering out front. He took a slow breath and stepped inside. The receptionist greeted him politely and led him to a hallway. A few minutes later, Malik stood outside a door with a small nameplate, Chief James Whitaker. He felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. The door opened and a man in his 50s with silver hair and calm eyes stepped forward. Malik had seen him before on TV and at campus events, but seeing him up close was different. His presence carried a quiet authority, but also a strange gentleness in the lines on his face. "Malik Turner," the chief said, extending his hand. "Come in." Malik shook his hand and stepped inside the office. The room was neat with bookshelves, framed photos of community events, and a large wooden desk. A soft light from the window brightened the space. "Thank you for seeing me," Malik said. "Of course," Chief Whitaker replied, sitting down. "Your letter was respectful." "I appreciate that," Malik sat across from him. His hands rested quietly on his knees. "I'll get straight to the point," he said softly. "I grew up in foster care. I've never known my father, but there's one thing I do know. His last name is Whitaker." The chief's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. His shoulders stiffened slightly. Malik saw it, even though it lasted just a second. He continued gently, "I don't know if that means anything, but after what happened the other night with Officer Henderson and the way things unfolded, I couldn't just ignore it anymore." The chief leaned back in his chair slowly. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the air conditioner. Then the chief spoke, his voice low but clear. "Malik, there are things in life that we don't always face when we should. Some truths are hard, but they don't disappear." Malik held his breath. "I know who you are," the chief said softly. Those words settled into the air like a stone dropped into still water. Malik felt his heart beat hard against his chest. He didn't know what to say. "I've known for a long time," the chief continued, "long before you came to this college. Your mother and I, we were very young. I made choices I can't change now. Choices I wish I'd faced sooner." Malik sat still, listening carefully. His chest felt both heavy and strangely light at the same time. "I thought I was doing what was best at the time," the chief said. "But the truth is, I was avoiding responsibility. I didn't think you'd ever end up here, and then I started seeing your name on college event lists. It shook me." Malik finally found his voice.
"Why didn't you say anything?"
The chief's eyes softened. "Because I was a coward about it. Because the uniform doesn't make a man brave in every part of his life." Malik looked down at his hands. He wasn't angry, not the way he expected to be. He just felt a quiet ache in his chest. All those years wondering, and the answer had been living just a few streets away. The chief leaned forward, his voice gentle but honest. "When Henderson called that night and mentioned your name, I recognized it right away. I asked him to bring me the report. That's why I reached out to meet you." Malik raised his eyes slowly. The man across from him wasn't just a police chief now. He was a part of a story Malik had never fully known. "You don't have to forgive me," the chief said quietly, "and I don't expect anything from you. But you deserve to know the truth. You always did." The room was quiet again. Malik felt the air move gently from the vent above. He thought about his childhood, the unanswered questions, the silent spaces in his story. For the first time, they weren't empty anymore. They had a name, a face. He took a slow breath. "I don't know how I feel yet," he admitted. "That's okay," the chief said softly. "You don't have to decide right now." Malik nodded. He stood slowly, and so did the chief. They looked at each other not as strangers anymore, but as two people standing on opposite sides of a long. The air outside the police station felt different. Malik stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the clear sky. The sun was warm but gentle, the way sunlight feels on a calm spring afternoon. Cars passed quietly. A few birds fluttered near the trees, and life around him moved like any other day. But inside him, everything had changed. For so long, Malik had lived with a silent question tucked somewhere deep inside him. He had learned to live with it. He had learned to carry it without letting it show. But now that question wasn't a shadow anymore. It had a face, a name, a truth. He began walking slowly back toward campus, the soft wind brushing against his skin. His thoughts came in quiet waves, not rushing or loud, just steady and clear. He thought about what the chief had said. He thought about all the years in between, years of him growing up not knowing, years of imagining, guessing, hoping, or pretending it didn't matter. It mattered. But what surprised him was that the truth didn't bring anger the way he always imagined it might. It brought something different, a strange, quiet stillness. For the first time in his life, there wasn't a blank space where his father's name should have been. There was a story, an imperfect, complicated human story. When Malik reached the campus, the afternoon sunlight made the buildings glow with soft gold. Students walked in groups, some laughing loudly, some with earphones in, lost in their own worlds. Malik walked among them, but his mind was somewhere deeper. He passed the fountain again, the same one he had walked by the night everything began. The water sparkled, and he could hear its soft, rhythmic sound. He sat on the edge of the fountain and stared at the ripples forming on the surface. It was strange how one moment can start a chain of events that leads to everything changing. Tara spotted him from across the courtyard. She walked toward him, her hair tied back, wearing a sweatshirt and sneakers. When she sat down next to him, she didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him carefully, reading his expression. "You met him," she finally said. Malik nodded slowly. "And?" she asked gently. Malik took a deep breath. "He's my father." Tara's eyes softened. "Malik." "Yeah," he said quietly. He knew. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved softly around them, carrying the distant sound of a guitar someone was playing near the library steps. The campus felt full of life, but between Malik and Tara there was a soft stillness, a space where big truths lived quietly. "What did he say?" Tara asked. Malik told her everything. Not rushed, not dramatic, just steady and real. He told her about the conversation, about how the chief admitted the truth, how he had known, how he had been silent all these years, and how instead of shouting or crying, Malik had simply listened. When he finished, Tara was quiet for a while. Then she said, "That's a lot to hold." Malik nodded. "Yeah. How do you feel?" He looked down at the water, watching it move. "I don't know. Not angry. Not really. Just heavy, like my heart's full, but not in a bad way. Just full." Tara smiled faintly. "That makes sense. I used to think that if I ever found out who my father was, everything would feel sharp." Malik continued. "I thought I'd be mad or broken, or maybe I'd feel nothing at all. But it's not like that. It's real, complicated, but real." He leaned back, letting the sunlight touch his face. For the first time in a long time, the question that had followed him through every stage of his life wasn't a wall anymore. It was a door, and it was open. Later that evening, Malik went back to his dorm room. He sat on his bed with the window open, letting the night air drift in. The campus was quiet now. Only a few lights glowed in the distance. He could hear someone laughing faintly in the hallway. Everything felt soft. He opened his old notebook, the one he used to write down thoughts he didn't share with anyone. On one of the earlier pages, he saw a sentence he had written years ago when he was in high school. "I wish I knew where I came from." He traced the words with his fingertip, feeling the weight of time. Now he knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Malik started writing in the notebook again, slowly, without trying to make it sound perfect. He wrote about the night under the flickering streetlight, about the question that started it all, about the moment he heard the truth. And for the first time, writing didn't feel like trying to fill a hole. It felt like placing stones on the ground to build something new. The next week, Malik received a short email from Chief Whitaker. It wasn't long, just a few lines thanking him for coming to talk, acknowledging that the road ahead would not be simple, and saying that the door was open if Malik ever wanted to speak again. The message didn't ask for forgiveness. It didn't make excuses. It simply left space. Malik read the email twice. Then he closed his laptop and sat quietly. He didn't reply right away. He wasn't sure what to say. And that was okay. This wasn't something to be rushed. Some truths need time to breathe. Over the next few weeks, Malik slowly found himself noticing little things differently. He noticed the way the morning sun lit up the campus walkway. He noticed the way his friends' laughter felt warmer. He noticed that the heaviness in his chest wasn't as sharp anymore. It had turned into something quieter, something he could live with. People around him didn't know what had happened. To them, Malik was the same student he had always been. But inside he was quietly different. He had grown, not taller, not louder, but steadier. Stronger in ways that didn't need to be seen to be real. One afternoon, as he sat on the grass reading a book, Tara joined him and handed him a smoothie. "You seem lighter," she said. He smiled a little. "Maybe I am. Did you talk to him again?" she asked. "Not yet," Malik said. "But I will. When I'm ready." Tara nodded with a smile. "That sounds right." Malik looked at the trees swaying in the wind, their branches whispering softly. Life was moving forward as it always did. But this time he wasn't moving forward with a missing piece. He was moving forward with a story he finally understood, even if it wasn't perfect. In the weeks that followed, things slowly changed in quiet ways. The police chief made a statement to the community. Nothing dramatic, just honest words about listening, learning, and opening doors instead of closing them. Malik didn't stand beside him or speak in public. He didn't need to. This part of the story was his, and it didn't need an audience. He focused on his studies, on his friends, on the future he wanted to build. But somewhere beneath all of that was a new sense of steadiness. A sense that his life wasn't built on questions anymore, but on truths. Messy, human, real truths. One evening, Malik found himself standing outside the same corner where everything began. The convenience store was still closed for the night. The same streetlight flickered softly, just like it had weeks before. The air smelled like rain and cut grass. He stood there for a while, just looking around. He thought about the night he met Officer Henderson. The unease. The uncertainty. The question that had started everything. And then he thought about where that path had led him. Not to anger, not to chaos, but to understanding. Malik smiled softly to himself. Life had a strange way of revealing answers when you least expect them. He hadn't planned for any of this. But sometimes the most unexpected journeys are the ones that bring the clearest truths. As he walked back toward campus, his steps felt lighter than before. He wasn't walking away from a question anymore. He was walking toward a future that felt wider, brighter, real. The wind moved gently through the trees, and the sound of distant laughter reached him from the dorms. His heart felt full, not with confusion this time, but with quiet strength. He whispered to himself almost like a promise. This is just the beginning. Malik didn't know exactly what would come next, maybe more conversations, maybe slow healing, maybe new connections. But he knew this, he wasn't alone anymore. He had a name, a story, a voice. And for the first time in his life, he felt like all the broken pieces of his past had not only found a place to rest, they had built the foundation of who he was becoming. As the night sky grew darker, Malik lifted his eyes to the stars. They had been there all along, steady, quiet, watching, just like the truth had been, waiting for the right moment to be seen. He walked into the soft glow of the campus lights, carrying not a question but an answer, and that changed everything.